What's up, Chaos? Welcome back to House Parties. We are still talking about our series By Faith. We talked about it all September. We're going to keep talking about it in the spooky month of October. I am Dan, and this is...
Hi, I'm Shelby.
That's Shelby. And we're going to talk about a cool person this week who we just talked about on Sunday, if you were there. His name is Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph's life was kind of crazy. For those of us that weren't there, Dan, could you recap it for us?
I'm glad to recap it. You can read about Joseph in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible. He gets the biggest chunk of that book of anybody. It's like chapters 36 or 7 to like 50 something. See what I did there? But it's all about, he has a crazy life. First of all, his father has a bunch of sons. Joseph is his father's favorite, which is kind of a wrong thing. So his brothers are obviously annoyed by that, naturally. They give him his dad gives him a cool coat with a bunch of colors. It's really pretty. Joseph wears it around. Joseph has a dream and decides to tell his brothers, which, by the way, if you have this kind of dream, keep it to yourself. But he has this dream that his brothers are going to like bow down before him. His older brothers, probably not a great thing to tell your siblings. They get mad. They sell him into slavery and tell their dad he died. Bit of a turning point there for his life. Then he gets sold to this guy named Potiphar's house, does a great job there. Eventually, Potiphar's wife likes Joseph a little bit too much, and Joseph gets thrown in prison for not doing anything wrong. Then he's in prison for a long time, completely forgotten about. But again, is doing well and doing his best while in prison, helps these guys out by interpreting dreams. Eventually, he gets before Pharaoh, interprets something for Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's like, yo, this dude's smart. We should put him in charge. And he becomes like second in charge of all of Egypt. He ends up saving Egypt from this giant famine and saves a bunch of people's lives. And eventually, his family comes back down to Egypt. There's this big reveal plot twist, where his brothers are blown away at who he is. But yeah, his life was pretty much defined by unfair moments, and getting the short end of the stick was kind of his whole life. And yet there's this line over and over and over again, no matter where he is, whether he's sold into slavery or he's thrown into prison or he's in charge, and it just says, yet the Lord was with Joseph.
Okay, so John had a couple points on Sunday, and one of them was that God is always working in my life.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear, right? We just saw in Joseph's life that yet the Lord was with Joseph, no matter how bad it was or how good it was, God was with Joseph. And so there's this cool idea in our life that there are moments where we feel like God is really at work, like where we see something really cool, where you feel like you're growing, or you see God work in your friend's life or in your family's life. And you have moments where you're like, man, God is doing something right now. And then there's moments in our life where we're like, where is God right now? And so I think Joseph's life, if we had to guess, at the end, he could look back at it and go, wow, look what God was doing. But all through his life, think about it, he spent years in prison. He spent a length of time as a slave. He spent all this time. I'm sure there were more times in Joseph's life where he was like, where is God? Than he was like, wow, look at what God did. And so he had big moments in his life that God showed up. But I think the defining factor is even in the moments where he was like, where is God? God was still working, still moving things forward in his great plan that we get to see at the end. And so I think the same is true of our life, right? And that's what John talked about a lot on Sunday. Even in the moments where I'm like, I don't feel close to God, I don't feel like he's doing anything, I feel empty, God's still working in our life. And there's this really cool line about how God is at work. We can see God at work in one or two areas of our life, but really he's at work in hundreds of areas in our lives. We just don't notice or see it. And so it's just a really cool idea that we serve a God who is always moving, always at work in our life and in the lives around us. And I think it's really cool to see Joseph's story where I'm sure that he was like, where is God? But it was really clear, and God made it clear in this giant story. And he used it to save a lot of people.
And I think that brings us to John's second point on Sunday, which was God uses everything to bring me to this point, and it's good.
It reminds me of what we talked about not this past summer, but a summer ago at camp, right? We talked about nothing wasted. That was our whole thing. My dream and my hope is that you can look around the room right now in your house party and someone is wearing a nothing wasted shirt. But it's what we talked about, right? That God uses the good, the bad, the ugly for his ultimate good and for our ultimate good. And so, I mean, we saw in Joseph's life, right? Is it a good thing that his brothers attacked him and threw him in a pit and sold him into slavery? No. Is it a good thing that while he was being a slave, the wife accused him of something and he got thrown in prison? No. Is it a good thing he got forgotten about in prison? No. Those are all bad things, but God still orchestrated and worked them in a way that ultimately led him to be second in command of Egypt and save countless people's lives from starvation and famine. So God's at work in your life. Maybe not in the same giant way that eventually you're going to be the vice president and save us from a famine and starvation. Maybe that could be what he has for you. And hopefully you don't get thrown in jail in the process. But God is at work in your life through the good things, the gifts he's given you, through the bad things, the mistakes you made or the decisions you made that you might regret. You can still use those to bring beauty and good. And through the ugly things that might be happening to you outside of your control that are difficult and ugly and you wish they weren't happening. The thing is, when we use those things to run to God instead of away from him, he uses them in really amazing ways to bring about ultimately what he wanted to do for his glory and for our good. And so I think that's the key, though, is every time we read about Joseph in the story, it's not that he was mad at God or he forgot God or he wanted to do his own thing. It was always, yet the Lord was with Joseph. And it seems like Joseph also continually ran after the Lord in whatever way he was and in whatever situation he was. And so I think that's how God got to use that in his life.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is in the long list of people in Hebrews 11, Joseph did not make the list because of all of those things that happened while he was alive. Instead, he made it because of this statement.
Hebrews 11:22, the verse guys are going to read together. I'm going to read now, but you can read it again. It says, by faith, Joseph, as he was nearing the end of his life, so keep in mind, this is in Egypt. His family's already there. He's already saved all these people from famine. He mentioned the exodus of the Israelites or leaving Egypt and gave instructions concerning his bones. So here's what that means basically is God gave Abraham this land. Okay, Abraham would be Joseph's, I think, great-grandfather. He gave them this land to live in. Now, they weren't there right now. They went to Egypt because of the famine and everything that was happening, and that's where Joseph was. So his whole family's in Egypt, but Joseph looked ahead at the someday and by faith was like, hey, we're going to eventually go back to the home that God has for us, like we talked about last week. And so he cared more about them taking his bones after he died to the homeland where God had promised them rather than stay where he was. So Joseph could have stayed, but he believed a better day would come. He believed that God would deliver on his promises. And by faith, he said, hey, don't leave me here in Egypt. This isn't where we belong. Take me home to where God promised us. And so the crazy thing is that's why he's in the chapter. It's not that he had faith when he was sold into slavery, which he did. It's not that he had faith when he was a slave, which he was. It's not that he had faith when he was thrown in prison. It's not that he had faith when he was leading all these people in Egypt. He did, but that's not why he made the chapter. He made the chapter because he was looking ahead at the someday rather than right now at the today. And I think he cared more about what God had in front of him and what God had promised them than just what was happening in his life right now. And so by faith, he lived for the someday. And so I think that's pretty important for us as well, that Joseph made a decision one day about what he chose to believe someday God would do something. And so that's kind of what John said on that Sunday, this past Sunday at church, is he kept talking about the someday, that Joseph kept looking ahead at the someday. And what is God doing in his life right now that will lead us to the someday in the future? And so I think that as we talk about by faith, we can look at Joseph's life. We can be amazed at how God worked those things together. Be amazed that God was at work in his life. Be amazed that God was using those things to bring about good. But I think then what we need to do is understand that God's working today, and we need to, by faith, look ahead to the someday of where we think God is taking us, and pray that today we can be faithful to continue to walk towards the someday. I said today and someday a lot.
And today, not someday, today, you're going to go to small group.
Yeah, and you're going to talk about faith today.
For someday.
Mm-hmm. And clock how many times you say day in your small group.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do you guys raise your hand right now if you have a like counter in small group? Because in 8th grade girls, we do. Instead of how many times do you say like today, it's going to be how many times do you say day?
Day. Some version. Someday, every day, one day, back in the day. All those count. Anyway, have a great time in small group. We love you. Go talk about faith.